Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to another episode of Crossing the T's. Hi, my name is Rudy, and you're going to participate. You're watching another episode of Crossing the T's. For those who are watching us for the first time, Crossing the T's is a 30-minute show, and we're going to discuss how linguistics support our classroom practices or ESL classroom practices. And if you guys are watching us for the very first time here on YouTube, please don't forget to hit subscribe to our channel, and hit the like button, which is the thumbs up right down here at the end of this video. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the channel and hit like. Um, One more thing. If you guys want to interact with us, if you're watching us live right now, if you want to interact with us, use the chat box. There's a chat box here. You can interact with us. We can share information, share experiences, and all these things. So feel free to use the chat box right here. And of course, this is going to make this episode way much better. So, having said all these things, well, if you're watching us right now, whether it's live or not, if you're watching the recording of this episode, um, I would like you to do the following. Okay, I'm going to give you some commands, and even if it's mentally, I would like you to actually respond to these commands. All right, and the very first thing I'd like you guys to do is to point to a piece of paper. Seriously, point to a piece of paper. Okay? Did you do that? Cool. Now, point to its shape. Point to the shape of this piece of paper. Did you do that? Nice. Now, point to the color of this piece of paper. Did you do that too? Now, how do you know all these things? When I asked you to point to the piece of paper, how did you know that? How did you know what you were supposed to point at? When I asked you to point to the shape of this piece of paper, how did you know uh, where to point to? The same with the color. This is something that Wittgenstein wrote in one of his several books. And well, basically, what we're going to see is that we do all these things because we do have some concepts in our minds. So, in today's episode, we're going to discuss the use or not, who knows, but we're going to discuss the teaching of grammar in a second language. Is it going to be good? Is it this not good? Should we teach descriptive grammar? No, we shouldn't. Grammar rules, we shouldn't do that. How uh, grammar works in our minds. So this episode is going to be all about this. Okay, guys? Now, let's start. Cool. All right. So the very first thing we have to understand, Maria Legersti and Meltov and Moore, Legersti in 91, Meltov and Moore in 94, they came to a conclusion that infants recognize sound patterns and tongue profusion. What does that mean? This means that kids don't realize whether we're using a preposition or not. They don't know when they're exposed to a conversation, they're exposed to the language, they don't know if we're using an adverb or not. They know patterns, sound patterns, and tongue protrusion. Okay, that's what they notice when someone's communicating, orally communicating with kids, with infants. All right, and not necessarily the syntax or syntactic terms. That's not one of the things that they realize. That's not one of the things that they pay attention to when they are being exposed to an oral communication with caregivers, with adults in general, or someone that's uh, older than the infants. Okay, and this brings me some example that Professor Eva Dabrowska used in many of her studies. The cat sat on the mat. So, according to one of his books, or actually according to many of her studies, when a kid or when an infant is exposed to the cat sat on the mat, and of course, the kid or the infant has the visual aid of a cat sitting on a mat, the kid's not necessarily going to realize what on means, the preposition on means. They're not going to realize what the word the means before the cat. Not even the before the mat. They're not going to pay attention to that. It's not going. These are the words that are not going to stand out when they are being exposed to that. On the other hand, they are actually going to realize the cat, the mat. So basically, these are the two words that are going to stand out when they're being exposed to that um, situation in the language. Why? Because they can actually see the cat, they can actually see the mat. Okay. What about the verb sat? You may ask me, like, Rudy, what about the mat? Well, what about the verb sat? Yes, there's a big chance that this kid later or afterwards, the kid is going to actually pay attention to the verb sat. Why will cat and mat stand out in this case? First, because they have visual connection. So basically, when someone says the cat sat on the mat to an infant, the infant is going to be like, okay, maybe cat is that entity over there, mat is that object over there, and the cat is probably performing some sort of action in that object. Um, yeah, that's pretty much very roughly what they're going to think. That's how they are going to connect the dots. What about on? Why is on underlined here? Because, well, they're not going to understand this, the meaning of on. They're not going to basically conceptualize on at first place. Later on, when they acquire some knowledge, some linguistic knowledge, then they are going to realize what on means. They're going to create a concept of what uh, the preposition on means. Okay, the structured words are noticed later in the process of language acquisition. All right? Okay. And of course, these are all possibilities. Okay. I'm not saying that, okay, so a kid that's being exposed to the cat sat on the mat, they're going to understand cat first, and then mat, and then sat, and then on, and only later in the linguistic development, they are going to understand the meaning and how to use the determiners. I'm not saying that this is an arbitrary order, okay? But what we have are possibilities. We do have possibilities, chances that kids are actually going to notice these words first, okay? They are, and the chances of noticing structural words like determiners, prepositions, and all these things, the chances are very minimal because they don't have the visual aid. They, especially with prepositions, they may have the visual aid of the preposition because it's easier for us to actually understand that because we already know what on means. So it may sound like whoa, wait a minute. So they're not going to understand that on means being um, uh, placed in a position of a surface. Yeah, it requires a very high level of maturity. Okay, and it's the same with the sentence that we have here that I have. Let's put the cereal up here. All right. So what infants are going to do here, they're going to associate all these things that's being performed and said in front of them. Okay, they're going to make this association in order to create a concept. Chances are they're going to, chances are, I'm not saying it's an arbitrary order, okay? Chances are that maybe cereal is going to stand out because they're actually seeing an object being manipulated, okay? Put, later on, it may stand out. And up here is very abstract, all right? But with the movement, if a person is actually performing the movement like up here, let's say that a baby or an infant is actually seeing a caregiver, a parent, moving the box of cereals from one position, from a lower position to an upper position. This is probably going to be easier for them to understand. Probably, okay? It's not arbitrary. It's easier for them, only easier for them. Okay. Um, Put in cereal. Up here is a little bit more abstract. All right, and they're that requires again a higher level of maturity for them to understand. But it may be easier when there is when they make a comparison, like okay, so the cereal box was at a lower position, so maybe up here means at a higher position or at an upper position. And then Rudy, what about let's? Oh, and before, let me go back a little bit, but up here, not only here, not only up here. This is really important. Up here, not we're not breaking down these this collocation here. All right, we're not breaking it down. Up here, one big thing. So this one big thing is going to make one concept. It's going to be responsible. It's going to represent one concept. Up here, meaning upper position. Okay? And then what about let's? Well, we're going to see in an instant that this may be useful when we talk about item-based language. Okay? But it's not necessarily going to have a specific meaning. It can be something that kids are going to reproduce because maybe this let's is used so many times so frequently, and then the kids are going to be like, okay, so people who I interact with, they use this let's all the time, so I think I'm going to use this again, but it doesn't have necessarily meaning for that. Okay, all right, and great, Rudy, you talk about concept a lot. So how does this concept come to life? Okay, so it's not so simple, but it's not that hard. So bear with me. There's a big chance that we're going to understand how we can create concepts. All right. There's a table here that I got from a study by William Kraft from 2007. Okay. Let's try to understand that. So what we have here is a sentence. Heather sings. Very simple sentence. Heather sings. Okay. So according to William Kraft, what we have actually two layers. We have the syntactic layer or the syntactic structure and the semantic structure. And this whole thing is the construction. So let's try to break down the layers. Okay. By starting with the semantic structure. We have the semantic structure. This is the concept that we have. Heather, probably a woman, a girl, a female person, okay? And she does something. She performs, okay? So these are the concepts that we have. This is what I call concepts. Heather, a lady, a female person, saying an action, performing some sort of action. So that's the concept that we have in our minds. And then, based on these concepts, based on this concept actually, then when we want to represent them, when we think about the language that we're going to use to represent these concepts, then we're going to create grammar. Why? Because grammar is nothing but the relation that words have among themselves. And we are going to make some combinations. Heather sings. Heather sings. There's a big chance, of course, this is the correct combination. This is the correct relation that the words Heather and sing have. Um, but there's a big chance that they're not going to reproduce or that they're not going to produce Heather sings, actually conjugating very well the verb sings in accordance with Heather, okay, with the subject here. There's a big chance that in the beginning we're going to have instances of Heather sang, no S, uh, not the proper conjugation of the verb here. And we have the construction. What's the construction? This whole thing. Because the construction is the concepts, the linguistic representation, and the exteriorized construction. When we speak, when we produce, then we have this construction. So again, first we have the concepts. We think about the language, meaning that we're going to basically choose whatever we have in our toolbox in order to represent the concepts. Heather, female, sing, action, some attitude, some performative word. Okay? And why did I mention toolbox? Okay? Because what we have, language, language is nothing but a tool that we use to represent concepts, the concepts that we develop through our life stages. Okay? And we're going to acquire, or we're going, sorry, to develop these concepts based on the usage. Because again, let's go back to the previous slide. What we need is the concept and the language in order to combine these two things. We're only going to create the concept Heather as a person, a female person, if someone actually use if someone uses the this word referring to a female person. If we never have this experience, if a person never has this experience, this person is probably not going to develop the concept of Heather. The same with sing, the same with appear, the same with sat, the same as on, so on and so forth. Okay, so usage is really important here. Um, and when I say and why, because this is what's going to make us have more and better tools in our toolbox. And when I talk about usage, I'm not necessarily talking about students' usage of the language, this too, but also our own language. Because if we compare now, if we make this analogy between language acquisition and second language acquisition in this environment that we are inserted in as language teachers, second language teachers, or foreign language teachers, we're going to represent what an adult represents in the development of a native language. Considering that, regardless of the age of our learners, of our students, okay? So we're going to be the ones that will probably present proper models, proper linguistic models, in order for our students to either create new concepts, develop new concepts, or associate the new linguistic token with the concept that they already possess. Okay, but it's usage. Usage from teachers or adults are just as important in this process. So we have to use language as well. We have to provide our students sometimes with proper linguistic models. And also, and again, making this analogy of L1 with L2, the acquisition process of both languages, then children would be represented by our learners or our students. Okay, and they also need to use the language. Of course, they have to use the language because if they don't use the language, how are we going to know how the process is going? So we need this linguistic data. We need this linguistic data. We need to to give students opportunities for them to use the language so we can make some adjustments and then do it again, make adjustments, do it again, make some adjustments, and do it again, different contexts, etc., etc. Okay? And when I say adjustments, I'm talking about not only linguistic adjustments, but also um, uh, situational adjustments. Maybe the language is okay, but it's not very appropriate for the situation. Remember from the first crossing the T's episode, we talked about going beyond the language. That's the moment we go beyond the language. So usage is really important in this process. Okay, why? Well, according to Tomasello, in one of his several studies, this is a study from 2005, he said that 45% of every maternal communication with their babies are item based. Okay, Rudy, what is item based? Let's pause for a moment. Let's go back a little bit, okay? And let's talk about item based for a moment here. Item based is when the production of a person is dependent on or revolves, actually, it's better than dependent, revolves around a linguistic production. Let's use let's use there is as an example. Okay, if we use there is as an example, this every linguistic production involving or revolved around there is item based, is based on this specific item there is. In several of his, in one of his studies, one of his books, one of Tomasello's books from 2003, he says that kids actually use this item there is very frequently. Probably because it's part of the 45% of maternal communication. That's a lot, huh? That's a real lot. So they're going to, every actually linguistic production that they are going to have is going to be based on there is. So there's doggy, uh, there's house, there's car, there's bike, there's horsey, etc., etc. Notice it's not there's a horsey, there's horsey, not there's horsey, there's horsey. Okay, there's horsey. Now, um, again, if 45% of every maternal communication is item based, do you really think that they're going to acquire some sophisticated language? They're going to actually produce some sophisticated language? I don't think so. I really don't think so. Okay. So again, there's doggy, there's horsey. Remember, is a determiner. The phonological aspect of it is very volatile. It's barely listened in a conversation. So probably the kid is not going to realize that there is a determiner there. There's a there. So there's doggy, there's horsey, etc., etc. It's the same when we're teaching our students, okay? And that's why telling our students that, okay, guys, so now we're going to talk about there to be, and in order for you to use this specific structure, you need a there and a verb be and an article or a determiner and a noun. I don't think this is going to be very practical when it comes to language acquisition and language use, because they're going to be like, okay, um, great. So what does this mean? So it's probably much more effective if we actually tell them um, how to construct, not to how to construct the language, but actually what this construction represents, what this construction means. Let's use past tense here as an example. So in their minds, kids, learners, let's talk about our students for now, okay? They're going to construct concepts uh, based on they're going to construct concepts and they are going to construct relations among words, okay? So if we think, um, uh, I gave I gave my mother a ring. Okay, it's pretty much similar to what we have here. X verbed Y the Z. This is the concept that our students will basically have in their minds. This is the grammar they're going to develop in their minds. Okay, once we provide the model, that's what they're going to construct in their minds. So they're going to construct the concept. They're going to develop their concept. Like, okay, every time I want to express that I am um, uh, giving a gift to a person, that's what I have to do. X verb Y the Z, or X verb. Of course, I gave you an example with an irregular verb, but X verbed Y a Z. I gave my mother a gift. All right? Okay? So mentally, we don't actually have to go through all these things when we're teaching our students. And more important, most important, and actually just as important, not more importantly, just as important, give our students the opportunity to actually use the language. Because again, this is a quote that I got from Tomasellos again. Okay, I forgot to uh, put the name of the person, but it's by Tomasello. We when we repeat the same language, they in a similar situation, in similar forms, linguistic forms, we are going to create a pattern. It's not this pattern, X verb Y to Z, is not going to happen, um, I don't know, after one instance, overnight. No, we will have to repeat. That's why recycling the language is so important. When we're teaching, recycling the language is really important because it takes several repetitions, different types of situations. So this is really important, and have our students use the language because when we design a lesson plan in which, okay, so this is a chunk that I'm going to teach my students. And when I say chunk, again, I'm saying chunk here. So this is a chunk. X verbed Y. X verbed Y is a chunk. It has a meaning. It's a meaningful chunk. So if we show our students the right model, I gave my mother, they are going to associate this to their concept. Remember when we talked about Heather? The good thing about teaching second languages is that the concept is already there. Probably the concept is already there. Our students already know the concept of giving presents or giving things, giving items. They already possess this concept. All we have to do is teach them the chunk. I gave my mother, and it's going to work afterwards. It's going to work pretty much like item based. I gave my mother a ring. I gave my mother a gift. I gave my mother a kiss. I gave my mother a car. I gave my mother uh, some trouble, a headache. You know, it's possible, but that's a chunk. We don't have to go through all the descriptive grammar here. Okay, so subject, verb in the past tense, a person that's going to receive the object, and z meaning the object. No, we don't have to go through all these things. It's not going to be very effective. Teaching the chunk is way much more effective. Okay, and uh, that's um, we. How long do we still have here? Okay, a couple more minutes. I promise you guys. Okay, and then we can uh, we can all go back to doing whatever we were doing. So this reminds me of, again, Professor Eva Dabrowska when she said learning the meaning of a referential word usually involves performing a sentence to world mapping. Sentence to world. I think this is key. This sentence to world is key here because thinking about our lesson plans, if we're using PPP, for instance, and then the second P stands for practice, this is the moment that our students are actually going to use the language and we're going to correct our students, make adjustments, repeat, do it again, different contexts, different situations. But it's not going, it doesn't have to be mechanized. Actually, it can't be mechanized because if it's mechanized, it's not going to be sentence. It's not going to be to world. It's not going to be sentence to world. They're going to be like, okay, but that doesn't make any sense to me because that's not how it works in real life. So when we're developing our lesson plans, we have to be very careful with this. Is this um, is this similar to what they're going to use in real life? If yes, great. So then you can create a whole drilling activity, and then performance, thinking about PPP performance as well. Okay, but more importantly, practice. And when I say practice, I'm not actually referring to the PPP. When I say practice, I'm talking about giving our students the opportunity to use the language. This is really important, actually, just as important. Okay, and why is this just as important? Because again, we're teaching chunks. So if we teach, for example, how do you do? How do you do shouldn't make any sense because how do you do is greeting. We greet by asking, how do you do? But if we analyze the linguistic the words and all these things, it's like how you perform a certain task, a certain activity. But the whole chunk doesn't mean that. It means greeting someone like, how are you? How are you doing? And all these things. So if we teach chunks and not necessarily the grammar, and we say, okay, guys, of course, we're teaching structures or we're teaching tenses. Um, if we're teaching simple present tense here, and then we say, how do you do? This is a chunk. And then we go beyond the language and we tell our students, guys, you use this when you greet someone. They already possess this concept in their minds. And all we're doing in this case here is giving them the tool for their toolbox, increasing their repertoire. Okay, guys? Yes? Well, I hope you had a great time. I had certainly a great time. So, bottom line, teaching grammar is not very effective. So teaching chunks is really important here because that's what we do in real life. And the chunks are basically going to be associated to the concepts. We create concepts and then we associate um, linguistic tokens to these concepts. And sometimes we have chunks like up here, like how do you do, like bread and butter. And when we retrieve, we don't retrieve word by word, we retrieve the whole chunk. Okay? So, thank you guys. This was another episode of Crossing the T's. I'm Rudy Macchiello, Please, if you really liked this episode, don't forget to hit the thumbs up down here to like it, and please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's really, really important. Thank you so much. Have a great week, and I'll see you on the episode 3 of Crossing the T's. Bye bye, guys.